I'm Sable Boroff, and I'm extremely happy to be here at Triangle Square today. And I'm excited because the subject of my history talk today is going to be a very famous lesbian couple, a power couple. And that's Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, that were in the early 1900s in Paris mostly. And I'm happy to be doing it here particularly. So we're going to start now. Gertrude Stein was born in 1874. Alice was born in 1877. Gertrude was born in, I think, Pittsburgh, but she moved to Oakland very young. Alice was born in San Francisco. So they're both American, both Jewish, both wealthy. They both lost their parents early in life, went to live with relatives. And Alice's grandfather was a rabbi, and Gertrude Stein, as I say, was born in 1874.
Take them in.
Hey, inside.
They were born in 1870. She was born in 1874, and she grew up in Oakland. And when she was in high school, she went to high school 1 year and ended up going to Radcliffe, which was the women's branch for Harvard. I mean, very smart. She probably was a genius. And she graduated from there and went into
Please go inside.
John Hopkins
Quiet,
Medical
go in
School.
there.
John Hopkins
inside,
Medical
please.
School, where she ended up having her first lesbian unrequited love affair with another woman who was with someone else. It broke her heart, and she ended up dropping out. But she studied under William James, who was the famous philosopher at Harvard at that time. And then so she never did become a doctor, and she was a writer, an avant-garde modernist writer. She helped really super affect the course of modern literature. She was an icon in that area. She also hugely influenced the art world. She didn't paint herself, but you're going to hear how she discovered the most fabulous painters on the planet in her salon in Paris. And what initially attracted me to talk about her and Alice was their salon in Paris, because it was fabulous. I mean, it was thrilling and exciting. So she moved to Paris, I believe, in 1903. And Paris in 1900 to 1930, with Berlin, was a mecca of gay rights or gay life. I mean, it was a stupendous gay life. In London and America, it was very stifled. And Gertrude left America because she didn't want to be handicapped by women's roles in America. So she went to Paris in 1903. She was very close to her brother Leo, and she and Leo began collecting famous artwork. These painters were not famous. They discovered Matisse, Picasso, Renoir. I mean, they were all in Paris at that time. And Cubism and Impressionism were new movements, and they were very avant-garde artists. And they had this salon, and they helped these artists get started. I even read that Picasso may never have been discovered if it wasn't for Gertrude Stein, because she brought collectors to the house. They saw her painting, the paintings, and that's where they met the artists, and this is how they got their start. And Matisse, he met Matisse in her salon, and they were lifelong friends. So Gertrude was there in 1903. And after the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, Alice, who lived there, moved to Paris. In 1907, on her first day in Paris, she met Gertrude Stein, and it was love at first sight. And they were completely mesmerized by each other, just completely fell for each other. And they were together almost 40 years till Gertrude died. I mean, they were very faithful to each other. They lived together. In 1910, Alice moved in with Gertrude and Leo, and then Gertrude and Leo had a disagreement, and he went off and left Gertrude alone with Alice in their salon in Paris, in their apartment in Paris. And So when they were in World War One, they lived through World War One and World War Two in Paris, which is pretty stupendous. And in World War One, they were wealthy and they had collected these artists, and they sold some of their artwork to help with the French war effort for World War One. And they actually drove cars and helped with medical supplies in World War One. And Gertrude Stein was a writer. She wrote poetry and books. She used stream of consciousness mostly in her writing. It was very avant-garde and very sophisticated with a very small audience. It was not popular writing. However, in 1930, she wrote the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which Gertrude wrote, but it was about their life together. And it was not as esoteric as the rest of her writing, and it became a big hit, and it was her only mainstream real big success. Although she was very well respected in writing circles, but only with the avant-garde. But this book became a big success, and she actually went back to New York in 1934 to do a book tour on it. It was her biggest success was the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which was written from the point of view of Alice, but it was all about Gertrude, really. So they had these salons, and everybody who was anybody was there. Hemingway, Thornton Wilder, Picasso, Matisse, Braque, Renoir, a lot of there was a Cocteau, who was Jean Cocteau, who was a gay man who was a writer, a philosopher in Paris. I mean, everybody was there. They also, let's see, I've got a whole list of who was there. Let me see. So she introduced Picasso, and Picasso's portrait of her, Gertrude Stein, is one of the most famous portraits he ever painted. She did word portraits of these artists who were in her salon. She affected a generation of American writers, and she wrote an opera, which was pretty successful, and so I'm looking for the writers that were in her salon. And she was, let's see, wait, I just wanted to go over them for you because they were the most brilliant of the movement. And Rousseau was there, and Isadora Duncan, and Mata Hari was involved in the Paris lesbian community. I'll talk more about the other lesbians there, but anyway, and Ezra Pound, and now I can't find it. Well, anyway, it was just fascinating, and it was just fascinating. Well, now of course that I want it, I can't find it, but she actually shaped the course of modern art and modern literature in that apartment there. And but in World War II, she had a dark side, and when I first started reading this, I was very upset. But I want to be able to tell the truth about people. She actually sympathized a lot with the Nazis, even though she was Jewish. She had two very good friends who were Nazis in the Vichy French regime, Fay and Pétain, who was a general. And they actually protected her and Alice from the Nazis in occupied France during the war. And after the war, she still sympathized with them, even after it was over, even though they were both Jewish. And, I mean, it's just appalling, really. But she had a chance to leave France, but she didn't do it. And she got through the war okay, and they didn't confiscate her art either. And they, of course, with the rich Jews, they just took every penny they had and killed them. But she and Alice escaped it. And even after the war, she was defending Pétain, and even after he was tried as a war criminal, she was still sympathizing with him. And Alice actually, after Gertrude died, gave money to try to help him escape from the prison that they'd thrown him in, the Democrats after the war. So it's a dark side to them that I just wanted to share. But the main thing that's striking about them is not really so much the writing that Gertrude did, which was not that much interest to me, but the life they lived as openly gay in a time when almost no one was, very few other people were doing it, and the tremendous love that they had for each other. They had a lot of nicknames for each other, and they used to scatter love notes around the house. Both of them, Gertrude would stay up all night writing, and she'd leave love notes on Alice's pillow. She'd wake up in the morning. And her pet names for Alice were Gay Kitten, Pussy Baby, Queen, Cake, Lobster Wife, Little Jew, and Gertrude, well, they were both Jewish. And then Gertrude was called by Alice King, husband, Mount, Fatty, and Alice was the delicious little wifey. So, and they had French poodles. They had 3 French poodles, Basket 1, 2, and 3, successive, one after the other. And also they had little chihuahuas. They had dogs. I didn't see any mention of cats, but they had a lot of dogs. And they, as I say, they were living together until
That's the only one I put there.
until Gertrude died, and she died in 1940, I think 46. And after she died, her last words were, she was dying. They were just about to go back to the U.S. and she was in the hospital with cancer, and her last words were, "What is the answer?" And Alice didn't say anything because, of course, she was right there by her side. And then Gertrude supposedly said, "In that case, what is the question?" And that was her last words. So, but after she died, Alice was alone. They were very wealthy. They had collected, Picasso's, Renoirs, Matisse. I mean, they had the creme de la creme of the art world that they owned. But Gertrude's family, like her brother and his family, stole all her money. They took it because Alice was not, lesbian couples were not married. Yeah. Alice had no right to, I mean, they just took it. So Alice was very poor after she died, and she lived to be 89, and she was very lonely and very sad.
That's terrible.
And it was awful for her, and she was poor, and she did some writing of her own, including her very famous Alice B. Toklas cookbook, which we all know because of the hashish brownies in there. But she lived on the generosity of friends, and she lived in Paris, and she died in '67. A long time afterwards, 21 years she lived without Gertrude, and she was brokenhearted the whole time. And the funny thing is about her cookbook, which was a memoir of their time together as well as recipes, because she would do the cooking, and she would play hostess to all the wives and girlfriends of all the painters and writers. And the men would go in the other room with Gertrude and smoke cigars and carouse. And Alice kept the women company, but they weren't allowed to talk about anything interesting. It was very sexist, really. But it was, 1920. So all the wives and the girlfriends would be, Alice would be the hostess for them. But when she wrote her cookbook, the actual hashish brownies were a recipe from a friend, and she actually never used hashish, and she never made those brownies, but they were in the cookbook, and they became the most famous part of it. Now I wanted to, so anyway, and then she died in '67, but I wanted to end this talk with, first of all, the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas was listed by one group as one of the 20 greatest English language nonfiction books of the 20th century.
Ah.
So, and it was really a memoir of their lives together. And, but I wanted to briefly describe, I got a little more information about 1900 to 1930s in Paris, as I said, was a huge gay movement. And there were other lesbians there who were way more wild and crazy than Alice and Gertrude. And there was a woman named Natalie Barney, and she had her own salon, and she had a big backyard where the guests danced naked on the lawn. And Isadora Duncan came by her house. Mata Hari rode her favorite horse naked through her garden at one of her parties. She was not monogamous. She had girlfriends, but also she never was faithful. She was not monogamous. So they were quite a lot more wild and crazy, and they sort of looked on Alice and Gertrude as kind of stodgy, you know, because they were homebodies and they were faithful to each other. But it was a wonderful, amazing time, and gave us, as I said, some of the greatest artwork and writers of our century, or the last century. So anyway, so that's about it. Lois, you can turn that off.
With the arrow?